Hello, and welcome to our second week of Old Testament theology. As I promised, things are going to be a whole lot more fun this week than having to go over the different methodologies and exegetical processes that one can use in Old Testament studies. And by the way, I have my two dogs, Jake and Levi, in here with me, so if you see a furry face stick up in the camera, that's going to be one of my boys. Come here, babies. Here, say hello. Come here. Come here, Levi. Come on. This is Levi, and he is one spoiled little puppy. Down you go, baby. Down you go. Down you go. And then if the other one sticks his face up, you'll know that's Jake. So let's go ahead and get started. Old Testament theology, as with any theology, of course, theology means a word about God. Theology is, again, specifically the study about the character and nature of God. And we are specifically involved this semester with looking at the character and nature of God as revealed to us through the Old Testament. Now, all theology, all understanding begins with revelation. And so Old Testament theology itself does begin with revelation. James Barr, who is a well-known exegete and Old Testament and New Testament scholar, he identifies two problems that modern theology has to work against. One is denial that God or any true knowledge of Him exists. It's impossible to compose or even initiate a study in theology unless one first starts with the assumption that God does indeed exist and that He is knowable. Also, the second thing that Barr points out is distinguishing between the knowledge of God that God has given to us about Himself and the contents of human science. The Bible is not a science book, even though there are scientific data and information contained within its pages. The primary purpose of the Old Testament was not that of a science book, but rather that of a book to tell us about the character and nature of this God that we serve. The existence of God is certainly assumed in the Old Testament. There is the only passage that would even deal with the denial of the existence of God is the one that says only a fool has said in his heart that there is no God. So the existence of God in the Old Testament is assumed from beginning to end. To know God means more than just an intellectual knowledge. In the Old Testament, when one says that they know God or that God is known by them, it's more than just an intellectual assent. It has a relationship element that goes with it. To know God is to be in a personal relationship with Him. To know God is to know some of the basics of His character and His nature, and to be on a journey or a pilgrimage of exploration to discover this great God that we serve. Now, the concept of revelation has certain terminology. There are three words in Hebrew that are all related to this revelation of God. One is yada, and yada means intimate knowledge. Adam yada Eve, and she bore a child, so it's the most intimate knowledge. It doesn't always imply sex, obviously, but it implies that intimate knowledge of another person, fully knowing them and being known fully by them. Ra'ah is another word, to see and to know and to be aware of. And then Galah. Galah is often translated as reveal or revelation. It means to uncover, to reveal, to be open. God has revealed Himself to us. He has opened Himself to us. And this is an incredible concept. The Creator God of the universe, who is self-sustaining, needing nothing nor no one, He has chosen in His infinite greatness to open Himself toward us. And I love the verbiage, that idea. It's like God has taken off the cover and said, here I am. I invite you to get to know the real me. I've taken all the masks off. I've taken all the robes, all the coverings off, and this is who I am. I have opened myself to you. And that is a powerful concept, and I think captures the idea of revelation and knowing God. Knowing God means to have intimate acquaintance with Him and to know that He has opened Himself to us that we might know Him. The root word for galah occurs 180 times in the Old Testament. It's used predominantly in the everyday sense of to go away, as in Jeremiah 32:11 through 14. It's used as with regard to the revelation of Yahweh in Genesis 35, verse 7. It's used in reference to the Torah in Deuteronomy 29:29. And when Samuel did not know the Lord, 1 Samuel 3:7 says, and Samuel did not know the Lord, he had no galah. God had not uncovered himself to Samuel yet. And then when the Lord uncovered David's ear to hear in 2 Samuel 7:27, not only does God open himself to us so that we can know him, it requires an uncovering of our ears, our heart, our mind, our eyes to know the Lord as well. Revealing God's word in 1 Samuel 2:27, his glory in Isaiah 40 verse 5, his arm or his strength in Isaiah 53:1. His salvation is revealed in Isaiah 56 verse 1. He reveals secret things in Deuteronomy 29:29 and Amos 3:7. He reveals the mystery, and that mystery of course is himself and his plan of salvation and redemption in Daniel 2:19, 22, 28, 29, 30, and 47. So what does revelation mean? Let's distill this. Vriesen, who again is another well-known Old Testament scholar, says that the Old Testament makes knowing God the first demand of life. Until we know God, no other part of life will make sense to us. Van Rad says that the knowledge of God means committed to, confidence in, and obedience to the will of God. So to know God, to have revelation of God, isn't just simply a mental knowing. It requires action on our part. We have to be committed, confident in him, and obedient to his divine will. So Barth and others, Karl Barth and some other scholars, offer an inflated revelation by denying any knowledge of God apart from special revelation. I would have to go wrong answer to that. While special revelation, God revealing himself to us personally, well, that is certainly important. Psalm 19 says that the heavens are declaring the glory of the Lord. So I think that even without special revelation, God reveals himself to us through the everyday events and happenings of life. Now, Samuel Ballantyne and then Terence Fretheim took on an idea called the hiddenness of God, and they make a very good case. Samuel Ballantyne, especially in his book, The Hidden God, or The Hiddenness of God, made a very good point that God is never fully revealed in the Old Testament, that there is always something about him that is somewhat hidden, whether it's in majesty or glory or just in the intensity of his manifest presence, but there's always some part of God that's hidden, and he's never fully revealed in the Old Testament. So how does God reveal himself throughout the pages of Scripture? Well, there's theophanies and epiphanies. Theophanies is when God invades time and we become aware of him, whether it's an internal sense or an actual vision. But a theophany is when God manifests himself to us, and we see him, whether it's the angel of the Lord or a burning bush. Those would all be theophanies. And then epiphanies, when we have that, oh my gosh moment, I see this and I understand this now, whether it's through some natural event or through some supernatural occurrence in our life. It's that, I see God now. Wow. And God also reveals himself to us through history. As a matter of fact, we are told by Paul in the New Testament that the events of Israel, historical Israel, has been given to us so that we might learn and we might know. So we learn spiritual lessons from the actual physical history of ancient Israel. Also, God reveals himself to us through words, ultimately through the written word of Scripture, through the word of preaching, through, and I don't really separate prophetic from the preaching, but then through the prophetic gifting as well, words of wisdom, words of knowledge. God reveals himself to us through his written word, and then through the word of his servants, his sons and daughters, who would declare his word to the nations. And then God reveals himself to us through faith. because any of these revelations requires faith. Because without faith, it is impossible to please God. But when we have faith, God begins to reveal himself to us in extraordinary ways through very ordinary means. God also reveals himself to us through his name. In the book of Exodus, when Moses says, "What is your name?" God says, "Ayah, Asher, Ayah, I am that I am." A person's name denotes their essence. When someone gives their name, they are revealing themselves to someone else because it reveals their essence. This is who I really am. Like whenever someone asked Jacob, "What is your name?" Jacob had to say, "I am a trickster, a manipulator, a supplanter." It revealed the inner condition of his heart. And when God reveals himself, he says, "I am that I am. I was, I am, and I always will be. I am the essence and source of all being." When one invokes the name, they're invoking that person's presence. For instance, to say Jacob means that you are calling Jacob and his actual presence. To call upon the name of the Lord means that you aren't just saying a magical word to get what you want. To call upon the name of the Lord is to call upon his divine presence to come and to invade the moment that you are in. So the meaning and significance of Israel's God, by giving them the name Yahweh, I am that I am, I was that I was, I will be that I will be. God is basically saying, whatever you need for me to be, that's what I am. If you need healing, I am your healing. If you need peace, I am your peace. If you need a warrior, I am your warrior. And I think this is still so relevant for us today. God still is I am. If you need peace today, he doesn't just send you peace or give you a little box full of peace. He is your peace. If you need physical, emotional, or spiritual healing, he is your healing. He isn't just the source of your healing. He is your healing. He is your answer, your solution to whatever problem you may be facing. He is still Ayah, Asher, Ayah. Now, creation, when God spoke, and it was, creation by means of making, the Hebrew word is asah. When God forming something or someone, yasar, and to get, to prepare, or possess is kana. Creating by means of birthing or begetting is a common idea, but when God creates, he creates ek nihilio, meaning that he creates something from out of nothing. We all can create something, even a baby, but a baby isn't created from nothing. A baby is created from an egg and a sperm, and those get connected and fertilization takes place, and 9 months later, if all goes well, you have a beautiful, healthy baby. But God creates something out of nothing. In the beginning, there was nothing, and God created the heavens and the earth just by the power of his spoken word. Language used by Israel's neighbors in relationship to a battle between the gods. Israel's neighbors, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and all the other ites, they had their own pantheon of gods, and they believed that good and evil were in a die-hard battle, and each side was 50-50, and you didn't know who was going to win. This is not true with the God of the Old Testament. There is no battle between God and some dark enemy force. God is supreme and powerful. When Satan sinned, God said, "Out now." There was no battle. He said, "Out now," and the enemy was gone. And so for us to have this mentality that God and Satan are in some sort of a dead heat battle and we're not sure which one's going to win, that is not biblical. God has already won. When Satan fell, God said, "Out now," and it was just over. Now the battle is between my flesh, my carnal nature, and sin, or the enemy. That is a very real battle. And the winning of that battle is determined by who I yield myself to. And sometimes that means 1,000 times a minute, because the battle just never stops. But there is no battle between God and some other equally powerful force. There is no one like our God. He is alone and unique in his greatness and in his power. Now, The first words in the book of Genesis are Bereshith bara Elohim. Bereshith, in the beginning, bara, he created God. In the beginning, God created. And the word bara is always used, only God baras. That word is only used in reference to Yahweh because only God can create something out of nothing. When he creates humanity, some of the things that he says with regard to humanity is that, make sure I've got all my right notes here. Yeah, I do. When God creates humanity, well, let's look at the whole creation thing. When God creates the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, he speaks to the water and he commands the water to bring forth the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. When he creates the beast of the field, he speaks to the earth and he commands the earth to bring forth the beast of the fields and the things that are going to creep upon the ground. Now think about this. The birds and the fish are forever dependent upon the water as their food source. So the water is their source. It's their source for life. You take a fish out of the water, it's going to die. You separate the bird from the water, it's going to die. So the fish and the fowl are ultimately dependent on the water as their source. Then the beasts of the field, if you put them in water, they're going to drown and die. And they are dependent on the earth for their food source and for their livelihood, because without the earth, they do not exist. But when God goes to create humanity, he doesn't speak to the water, he doesn't speak to the earth, he doesn't speak to the sky, he speaks to himself and he says, let us make man. Man meaning a generic term for male and female. Let us make humanity in our own image, because ultimately humanity finds its ultimate source as God. Because if he is not our source, then we're not going to live. We're not going to make it. We will have no existence. And I like the words of St. Augustine. The heart will find no home until it finds its home in God. And that's a very powerful concept and idea. So the image of God that's in humanity, what is it that makes us like God? We don't look like God because God is spirit and we are flesh. Well, we have dominion, just like God. I mean, we don't have the same level of dominion as God, but we reflect the idea that we desire to have dominion over our environment. We are going to house the Spirit of God. Both male and female are included in the image of God. We're going to be his divine representatives on the earth. We, unlike any other of the animal kingdom, we're going to be able to relate to God. And we're going to have the ability, the power of the soul for memory, love, and intellect. And these things are all important. We reflect God in our desire for the good. We reflect the image of God in our desire to have dominion over our environment and the things around us. And we reflect the image of God in our desire and love for creativity, because we all love to create. Now, with regard to the fall, Adam and Eve were told, you can eat from all the trees in the garden, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you cannot eat. When Eve finally got into the time of temptation with the serpent, it wasn't just you can't eat, but you can't touch, and almost you shouldn't even look at, because in the day that you do, you will surely die. Now, I'm going to go into the fall a little bit more next week when we talk about sin, but if we look at the outline, the theological outline of the book of Genesis, chapters 1 and 2, God is creator. In Genesis 3 through chapter 6, it's sin, judgment, and redemption, which reflects the holiness of God. And in chapters 6 through 11, it's punishment and renewal. In chapters 11 through 25, it's the call of Abraham and covenant. In Genesis 25 through 28, it's the continuation and the faithfulness of God even when we are faithless. In Genesis 28 through 36, it's election and protection. And in chapters 37 through 50, it's the protection of God. And all of these things, just the book of Genesis is so rich with its understanding of the character and the nature of God. I have just skimmed the surface. So God bless you guys in your reading and in your class time this week, and I'll see you again next week.